Hello and welcome to Chapter 2 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Now this is your task for today. This is what we call a narrative arc, and it's the way that successful stories are laid out so that it's pleasing for the reader and it builds up the tension and it gets us to the main point, and then it, funnily enough, comes to the end. Now here is tension, so that's how exciting the story is. Here's the narrative progression. That means how the story develops. Exposition means the beginning of the story. So that tells us about main characters, what the story's about, gives us a bit about the setting. Then we have a complication. So that's the puzzle or something that goes wrong or something that the person needs to solve. The escalation is where we get into the most exciting bit, which is the climax, which is where the monster is found, or there's a fight, or James Bond arrests the spy, or whatever. And then the resolution is where we solve what's going on here in the exposition. Now, nearly all stories fit into this narrative arc in some way. For example, let's say we had an episode of Scooby-Doo. If we're using some brilliant English literature, we have the exposition. So we've got them all in the van and they're going off and they get to the ice cream factory. And then they arrive at the ice cream factory and they discover that there are some strange comings and goings and they believe the ice cream factory is haunted. And then it escalates, goes Scooby and Shaggy go off looking for Scooby snacks and they get chased around the factory. And then they pull the mask off the person who's the ghost and they go, oh my goodness, it's the caretaker. And then they find out that the caretaker of the ice cream factory was supposed to inherit it, but he didn't, and he's been angry ever since, blah, 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 blah. The end. Right. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to draw your own narrative graph, and I want you to think about a story that you're going to write. And then write on your graph what your exposition is, how it's going to get complicated, what's going to happen when it's escalating, what your climax is going to be, so what's the most exciting part of your story, and then how it's going to end, and then write them on there, and then take a picture and send it to me. Okay? Now, we're going to carry on with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We're in the exposition phase at the moment, so we're finding out about the main characters in the book and we're finding what the story is going to be all about. Right. Thank you very much to everybody who has already sent in their stories. There was some particularly good writing from Michael in Year 8 who wrote about phosphorants in tentacles. And there was also some very good work from Tessina. So well done to you two. Excellent story writing. If you haven't done it already, go back and watch episode 1 and do the task that was set. Okay, chapter 2, pro and con. At the period when these events took place, I had just returned from a scientific research in the disagreeable territory of Nebraska in the United States. In virtue of my office as assistant professor in the Museum of Natural History in Paris, the French government had attached me to that expedition. After 6 months in Nebraska, I arrived in New York towards the end of March, laden with a precious collection. My departure for France was fixed for the first days in May. Meanwhile, I was occupying myself in classifying my mineralogical, botanical, and zoological riches when the accident happened to the Scotia. Mineralogical means to do with rocks and stones and minerals, botanical, plants, and zoological to do with animals. I was perfectly up in the subject, which was the question of the day. How could I be otherwise? I had read and reread all the American and European papers without being any nearer a conclusion. This mystery puzzled me. Under the impossibility of forming an opinion, I jumped from one extreme to the other. That there really was something could not be doubted, and the incredulous were invited to put their finger on the wound of the Scotia. Incredulous means people who struggle to believe. On my arrival at New York, the question was at its height. The hypothesis, So that's the thought, the answer to the question. The hypothesis of the floating island and the unapproachable sandbank, supported by minds little competent to form a judgment, was abandoned. And indeed, unless this shoal had a machine in its stomach, how could it change its position with such astonishing rapidity? Shoal is the word for a group of fish. From the same cause, the idea of a floating hull of an enormous wreck was given up. There remained then only two possible solutions of the question, which created two distinct parties. On one side, those who were for a monster of colossal strength. On the other, those who were for a submarine vessel of enormous motive power. But this last hypothesis, plausible as it was, could not stand against inquiries made in both worlds. That a private gentleman should have such a machine at his command was not likely. Where, when, and how was it built? And how could its construction have been kept secret? Certainly a government might possess such a destructive machine. But in these disastrous times, when the ingenuity of man has multiplied the power of weapons of war, it was possible that, without the knowledge of others, a state might try to work such a formidable engine. Ingenuity means ways of thinking up answers to questions and just being clever. After the chassepôts came the torpedoes. After the torpedoes, the submarine rams. Then the reaction. At least I hope so. But the hypothesis of a war machine fell before the declaration of governments. As public interest was in question and transatlantic communications suffered, their veracity could not be doubted. But how admit that the construction of this submarine boat had escaped the public eye? Veracity means truthfulness. For a private gentleman to keep the secret under such circumstances would be very difficult, and for a state whose every act is persistently watched by powerful rivals, certainly impossible. After inquiries made in England, France, Russia, Prussia, Spain, Italy, and America, even in Turkey, the hypothesis of a submarine monitor was definitely rejected. Upon my arrival in New York, several persons did me the honour of consulting me on the phenomenon in question. I had published in France a work in quarto in 2 volumes entitled Mysteries of the Great Submarine Grounds. This book, highly approved of in the learned world, gained for me a special reputation in this rather obscure branch of natural history. My advice was asked. As long as I could deny the reality of the fact, I confined myself to a decided negative. But soon finding myself driven into a corner, I was obliged to explain myself categorically, and even the Honourable Pierre Aronnax, professor in the Museum of Paris, was called upon by the New York Herald to express a definite opinion of some sort. I did something. I spoke for want of power to hold my tongue. I discussed the question in all its forms, politically and scientifically. And I give here an extract from a carefully studied article which I published in the number of the 30th of April. It ran as follows. After examining one by one the different hypotheses, rejecting all other suggestions, it becomes necessary to admit the existence of a marine animal of enormous power. The great depths of the ocean are entirely unknown to us. Soundings cannot reach them. What passes in these remote depths, what beings live or can live 12 or 15 miles beneath the surface of the waters, what is the organisation of these animals? We can scarcely conjecture. That means have a guess. However, the solution of the problem submitted to me may modify the form of the dilemma. Either we do know all the varieties of beings which people our planet, or we do not. If we do not know them all, if nature still has secrets in mythology for us, nothing is more conformable to reason than to admit the existence of fishes or cetaceans of other kinds, or even of new species, of an organisation formed to inhabit the strata inaccessible to soundings, and which an accident of some sort, either fantastical or capricious means good luck, has brought at long intervals to the upper level of the ocean. If, on the contrary, we do know all living things, we must necessarily seek for the animal in question amongst those marine beings already classed. And in that case, I should be disposed to admit the existence of a gigantic narwhal. The common narwhal, or unicorn of the sea, which is a real animal by the way, often attains a length of 60 feet. Increase its size 5-fold or 10-fold, give it strength proportionate to its size, lengthen its destructive weapons, and you obtain the animal required. It will have the proportions determined by the officers of the Shannon, the instrument required by the perforation of the Scotia, and the power necessary to pierce the hull of the steamer. Indeed, the narwhal is armed with a sort of ivory sword, a halberd, according to the expression of certain naturalists. The principal tusk has the hardness of steel. Some of these tusks have been found buried in the bodies of whales, which the unicorn always attacks with success. Others have been drawn out, not without trouble, from the bottom of ships, which they had pierced through and through, as a gimlet pierces a barrel. Gimlet is like a pin, a very sharp pin. I think I'll check. The Museum of the Faculty of Medicine of Paris possesses one of these defensive weapons, 2 yards and a quarter in length and 15 inches in diameter at the base. Very well. Suppose this weapon to be 6 times stronger and the animal 10 times more powerful. Launch it at the rate of 20 miles an hour and you obtain a shock capable of producing the catastrophe required. Until further information, therefore, I shall maintain it to be a sea unicorn of colossal dimensions, armed not with a halberd, but with a real spur, as the armoured frigates or the rams of war, whose massiveness and motive power it could possess at the same time. A frigate is an armed ship. Thus may this inexplicable, unexplainable phenomena be explained, unless there be something over and above all that one has ever conjectured, seen, perceived, or experienced, which is just within the bounds of possibility. These last words were cowardly on my part, but up to a certain point I wished to shelter my dignity as professor and not give too much cause for laughter to the Americans, who laugh well when they do laugh. I reserved for myself a way of escape. In effect, however, I admitted the existence of the monster. My article was warmly discussed, which procured it a high reputation. It rallied round it a certain number of partisans. The solution it proposed gave, at least, full liberty to the imagination. The human mind delights in grand conceptions of supernatural beings, and the sea is precisely their best vehicle, the only medium through which these giants, against which terrestrial animals such as elephants or rhinoceroses are as nothing, can be produced or developed. The industrial and commercial papers treated the question chiefly from this point of view. The Shipping and Mercantile Gazette, the Lloyd's List, the Packet Boat, and the Maritime and Colonial Review, all papers devoted to insurance companies which threatened to raise their rates of premium, were unanimous on this point, which means they all agreed. Public opinion had been pronounced. The United States were the first in the field, and in New York they made preparations for an expedition destined to pursue this narwhal. A frigate of great speed, the Abraham Lincoln, was put in commission as soon as possible. The arsenals were opened to Commander Farragut, who hastened the arming of his frigate. But as it always happens, the moment it was decided to pursue the monster did not appear. For 2 months no one heard it spoken of. No ship met with it. It seemed as if this unicorn knew of the plots weaving around it. It had been so much talked of, even through the Atlantic cable, that jesters pretended that this slender fly had stopped a telegram on its passage and was making the most of it. So when the frigate had been armed for a long campaign and provided with formidable fishing apparatus, no one could tell what course to pursue. Impatience grew apace, when on the 2nd of July they learned that a steamer of the line of San Francisco from California to Shanghai had seen the animal 3 weeks before in the North Pacific Ocean. The excitement caused by this news was extreme. The ship was revictualled and well stocked with coal. Revictualled means they put some food on board. I'm just off to Lidl to re-victual my kitchen. I'm not actually, but there you go. 3 hours before the Abraham Lincoln left Brooklyn Pier, I received a letter worded as follows. To M. Aronnax, Professor in the Museum of Paris, Fifth Avenue Hotel, New York. Sir, if you will consent to join the Abraham Lincoln in this expedition, the government of the United States will, with pleasure, see France represented in the enterprise. Commander Farragut has a cabin at your disposal. Very cordially yours, J.B. Hobson, Secretary of Marine. Right, so your task, draw a narrative arc, plan out your short story. Now, it doesn't have to be about a monster. It can be about absolutely anything you like, but make sure you choose your genre, which means the type of story it's going to be. Make sure you use the vocabulary, which will be in the comments on the video, and enjoy. See you tomorrow.